Hey viewers! Hope you're all doing great. Before I start the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. The day the Mongols burned Baghdad. In the dim candlelight of memory, Baghdad stood as a jewel upon the Tigris, a city of learning, poetry, domes, scholars, and the whisper of manuscripts. For centuries it had been the beating heart of the Islamic Golden Age, the capital of the Abbasid caliphs. Its libraries were treasure houses of all human knowledge. In mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, literature, and the sciences of the ancients. But one day in 1258, that world changed forever. The Mongols, under Hulagu Khan, marched upon Baghdad. Walls cracked, gates fell, and fire consumed the libraries and palaces. The night the world's greatest library turned to ash marked the end of an era, an end to the Golden Age that had lifted voices across the Islamic lands and beyond. This is the story of that day. We begin in the years before the storm. Baghdad in the mid-13th century was thriving, though not without fault. The Abbasid caliphs had ruled for centuries, their power ornate but brittle. Political intrigue, court rivalries, and internal divisions grew. Factions vied for influence. The Caliph al-Mustasim ascended to rule, inheriting both prestige and peril. To the east, under the vast Mongol sky, the empire born from Genghis Khan pressed west. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, was sent with a mighty host. His mission, to subdue Persia, eliminate threats, and bring Baghdad to heel. In 1257, Hulagu moved closer. He demanded submission from the caliph. He asked tribute. He sought control of Baghdad's defenses. But al-Mustasim, confident in walls and legacy, hesitated. His advisors debated. Some urged diplomacy. Others insisted on defiance. Meanwhile, some in Baghdad murmured of traitors in the court, of viziers who had undermined the caliph's decisions, weakening already strained defenses. By January 29, 1258, the Mongol forces were before Baghdad's walls. The siege was methodical. Palisades and ditches encircled the city. Siege engines hurled rocks, towers advanced. The caliph attempted negotiation, but Hulagu answered only cruelty. On February 5 the outer defenses fell. On February 10, al-Mustasim surrendered. But the Mongols delayed entry until February 13, preparing their devastation. When they entered, they unleashed destruction over a week. Mosques, palaces, hospitals, libraries, all were ransacked. The House of Wisdom, the Grand Library, burned. Manuscripts were torn. Books flung into the Tigris until the waters ran black with ink. Scholars, poets, scientists were massacred or enslaved. The caliph was captured and executed. In one account, rolled in a carpet and trampled. Others say a more brutal end awaited him. Baghdad's fall was more than a military defeat. It was a wound to the soul of civilization. The Golden Age, once luminous, grew dim. And though Baghdad would later rise in some measure under Mongol rule, it never again reclaimed its former glory. The year is 1258. Beyond the golden domes of Baghdad, the sky turns gray. The people, who had once walked the marble courtyards of the House of Wisdom, now whisper in fear. The Mongols have come. They are no rumor now. They are dust clouds on the horizon, banners of wolves and thunder. Hulagu Khan's armies move like an iron tide. Mongol cavalry, Persian engineers, Chinese siege masters, Armenian auxiliaries, a force unlike any the caliph had ever imagined. The Abbasid court trembles, but still, the caliph hesitates. He is al-Mustasim Billah, descendant of the great al-Mansur and al-Mamun, men who built and expanded the empire of knowledge. But in him, the strength of those ancestors flickers faintly. He believes, as his advisors tell him, that Allah will not allow Baghdad to fall. He believes the city's walls are blessed, its legacy unbreakable. Yet, outside those walls, Hulagu Khan builds the instruments of annihilation. On January 29, the Mongols encircle the city. They dig trenches, deep, wide, fortified with spikes and mud, to trap any who might flee. Siege towers rise like skeletal giants, cloaked in wet hides to resist fire. Great catapults, mangonels, creak as they're assembled by engineers from every corner of the Mongol Empire. Inside Baghdad, the streets fall silent. The muezzins still call for prayer, but their voices tremble. Markets close. Scholars carry their books home, clutching them like children. Mothers fill jars with water and hide them in the cellar. For 6 days the sky rains stones. Massive projectiles, some flaming, others tipped with iron, crash into minarets and walls. Towers crumble. The people cry, "Ya Allah! Baghdad will fall." Finally the caliph sends envoys, frail, frightened men, to beg Hulagu for peace. They carry gifts, gold, silks, promises. But Hulagu's reply is cold. "You had your chance." He orders his catapults to continue. The Mongols breach the western wall near the Kark district. The defenders, poorly armed and uncoordinated, fight bravely but are crushed. By February 5th, Baghdad's outer defenses have collapsed. Inside the city, chaos. The Abbasid troops abandon their posts. Some throw down their swords and flee into the alleys. The caliph's vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, is accused of betrayal. Some claim he conspired with the Mongols to preserve the Shia population, though historians still debate this. Whether true or not, the rumor spreads like fire. On February 10th, the caliph himself surrenders. Hulagu orders him to appear in his royal tent, a vast pavilion surrounded by banners and skulls of past enemies. The caliph kneels, trembling. He offers submission, tribute, anything. But Hulagu's voice is calm, almost tender. "Had you heeded my first message, your city would still stand. Now you will watch what becomes of arrogance." The next 2 days, the Mongols prepare for entry. They divide the city into sections. Every district is mapped, each gate assigned to a Mongol commander. Hulagu wishes to make an example of Baghdad, as his grandfather Genghis did to Khwarezm. On February 13th, the order is given. The gates are opened. Thousands pour in. Soldiers, archers, looters. And the sound that follows is not the sound of war, but of the end of a world. The crack of doors. The shatter of vases. The sob of a scholar clutching a burning manuscript. Baghdad burns. The gates of Baghdad stand open. And through them the Mongols enter, not as conquerors of a city, but as the destroyers of a civilization. Their boots crush the marble streets that once led to the House of Wisdom. Their horses trample the gardens where scholars once debated under the moonlight. The city that was the heart of the world, Madinat al-Salam, the city of peace, trembles beneath the weight of thunder. It begins in the Kark district, markets and homes first. The Mongols move street by street, house by house. Nothing is spared. Men are cut down where they stand. Women and children cry for mercy, but mercy does not come. Shops are looted, gold melted, silks torn apart. By noon, smoke rises in black columns across the horizon. By evening, the sun itself disappears behind a veil of ash. The House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, stands at the heart of the city, its walls lined with scrolls and books written over 5 centuries. Here once worked scholars like al-Khwarizmi, who gave the world algebra, al-Razi, the physician, and translators who preserved Greek and Persian knowledge. But now, that house is silent. When the Mongols reach its doors, they break through them with axes. The librarians and scholars who refuse to flee are cut down at their desks. The manuscripts, hundreds of thousands of them, are carried to the banks of the Tigris. The river, once the mirror of the city's light, turns black. Books are thrown into it until its waters overflow with ink. Chroniclers wrote, "For days, the Tigris ran dark with the ink of wisdom, and red with the blood of scholars." The Mongols did not understand what they were destroying. To them these were trophies, fuel for fire. But to the world it was the loss of centuries. Pages that had preserved the discoveries of Greece and India, the philosophy of Aristotle, the medicine of Ibn Sina, all drifted away like ghosts on the current. In his gilded palace, Caliph al-Mustasim is kept alive. He is paraded through his ruined city to see what his hesitation has cost. Witnesses say that he wept, not only for his throne, but for Baghdad itself. The Mongols mock him. Some claim Hulagu ordered that he be rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses, so that no royal blood would be spilled on the earth. Others say he starved, surrounded by the very gold he refused to spend on defense. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. The last Abbasid Caliph of Baghdad dies not as a ruler, but as a warning. For 7 days, the slaughter continues. The mosques are filled with corpses. The hospitals, once models of science, are ruins. The markets echo only with the groans of the dying. Chroniclers wrote that more than 800,000 people perished, though some said the number reached 1 million. The truth cannot be known. But the silence that followed was greater than any number could measure. When the fires finally die, the Mongols move on, leaving behind a city of ash and bones. Baghdad is dead. But from the ashes, whispers begin. They say, the Mongols came for gold and glory, but they unknowingly destroyed the soul of the world. When the fires cooled, survivors crept from the ruins. They searched for loved ones beneath the rubble, calling names that would never answer. The scent of death hung over every street. The palaces were hollow, the mosques blackened and broken, and the house of wisdom, only its foundation stones remained. The once mighty city that had been the jewel of learning, trade, and faith, Baghdad, the city of peace, had become a graveyard. Across the Islamic world, news traveled like thunder. From Cairo to Cordoba, from Samarkand to Delhi, scholars and rulers trembled. The Abbasid Caliphate, the symbol of unity for centuries, was gone. The Prophet's banner, once held high over empires, now lay trampled in dust. And yet, in distant lands, hearts began to stir. In Egypt, the Mamluks whispered, "If the Abbasids are gone, we must guard Islam now." In Andalusia, poets wept and wrote verses of loss. In Persia, scribes began rewriting what knowledge could be saved from memory alone. The world had changed forever. Not all wisdom died in Baghdad. Some scholars escaped before the siege, carrying manuscripts hidden under their robes, or written from memory. In Damascus, libraries reopened. In Cairo, new copies were made of the surviving works of Ibn Sina and al-Razi. And in Mongol Persia, something unexpected began to happen. A few Mongol rulers, like Hulagu's grandson Ghazan Khan, converted to Islam. He rebuilt mosques, funded scholars, and asked, "Teach us what we burned." From destruction came curiosity. From ashes came revival. Even the Tigris, the river that once ran black with ink, carried stories downstream. Scroll fragments floated into villages and ports. Fishermen found them stuck to their nets, pages from forgotten books. Some said that the river kept the memory of what was lost, that every drop still whispered verses, formulas, poems, and prayers. And so Baghdad, though dead, continued to speak, not with its voice, but through the world it had enlightened. Years later, travelers passed through the ruins and saw children playing among broken marble columns. One boy, they said, picked up a piece of scorched parchment and traced the Arabic letters with his finger. He didn't understand the words, not yet, but he looked up and said, "Someone must write them again." And that was how the story of knowledge began to rebuild itself. Civilizations fall, empires turn to dust, but ideas, they find a way to live again. After Baghdad's fall, Hulagu Khan stood among the ruins. The city's gold and jewels were piled high, but his face was expressionless. Even for a Mongol, the silence was too deep, the stench too heavy. His soldiers, who once roared with bloodlust, now spoke in hushed tones. Many claimed to see ghosts walking the charred streets at night. Scholars without faces, scribes without hands, their whispers riding the desert wind. The empire had won a victory so vast, It began to weigh upon their souls. From the great steppe to the deserts of Persia, the Mongol Empire stretched like a thundercloud. But now, fault lines began to form. Hulagu's conquest of Baghdad was meant to glorify his brother, the great Khan Monk. Yet news came soon after. Monk was dead, fallen during a campaign in China. The unity of the Mongols shattered. Rival princes returned to the steppes to claim power. Hulagu's armies were stranded in the west, their loyalties uncertain. And behind them, the ashes of Baghdad smoldered, a curse on their triumph. In the years that followed, a strange transformation began. At first, Mongol Khans mocked the faith of those they had conquered. But slowly, the rhythm of prayer, the call of the muezzin, the poetry of the Quran, it began to reach them. They saw that Islam was not only a religion, it was a civilization, a way of life that bound people together through centuries, long before any Khan was born. Some Mongols converted for diplomacy, others from fascination, but a few truly from awe. "We have conquered the lands of Muslims," one Mongol general said. "But they have conquered our hearts." Hulagu's descendants ruled from Tabriz and Moraga, forming the Ilkhanate, a Mongol kingdom in Persia. Under their reign, scholars returned. Observatories were built. Trade revived. The Mongols had once burned books. Now they sponsored their creation. Artisans, scientists, and poets found patronage again. In time, paper replaced parchment once more. And the ink that once stained the Tigris flowed again in the script of revival. It was not Baghdad reborn, but it was the world healing quietly. Still, Baghdad's ruins remained untouched, a silent warning carved in dust. Travelers described it as a city of bones. They said the Tigris flowed slower there, as though mourning its burden. And when the moonlight struck the broken domes, they gleamed like tombstones of a lost age. Yet pilgrims came, not for relics or gold, but to remember, to kneel where the house of wisdom once stood, and whisper, "Knowledge never truly dies. Civilizations do not vanish. They fade, they scatter, and sometimes they find a new language to speak through." In the months following the fall of Baghdad, the once great city became a shadow of itself. The domes that had glittered with gold now lay shattered. The marble courtyards of the caliph's palace were filled with rubble and ash. What had once been called Madinat al-Salam, the city of peace, now looked like the ruins of a dream. From the east, merchants who once traveled to Baghdad's markets turned away, afraid. From the west, pilgrims whispered prayers for the fallen. And in the heart of the Islamic world, a question echoed like thunder. How could the city of knowledge fall? But faith, unlike cities, does not burn. Across the lands of Islam, from Cairo to Damascus, from Samarkand to Fez, the scholars grieved but continued to write. They spoke of the tragedy not as the end, but as a test. "When ink runs into the river," one said, "the water becomes wiser." Mosques that once looked to Baghdad for guidance became new beacons. The voice of Islam did not fall silent, it simply changed its tone. Where swords had fallen, pens began to rise again. Far to the west, in Egypt, a new power began to emerge. The Mamluks, slave soldiers who rose to command kingdoms. They had defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut in 1260. The first time the invincible horsemen were stopped. Cairo became a sanctuary for scholars fleeing from the ruins of Baghdad. There, the libraries began to fill once more. The sound of students reading the Quran returned to the air. In its quiet halls, the spirit of Baghdad found a new home. "If Baghdad was the heart," one poet wrote, "then Cairo became the soul." Many of the surviving scholars of Baghdad found refuge in distant cities. Some carried only fragments of manuscripts hidden in their robes. Others carried nothing but memory, the verses of the Quran, the works of Aristotle, the calculations of the stars. In the madrasas of Damascus, Aleppo, and Cairo, these fragments became seeds. They taught again. They wrote again. They preserved what could not be destroyed. For every library that burned, Another mind opened like a door. In time, Cairo's Beit al-Ilm, the new house of knowledge, rose from the ashes of Baghdad's dream. Astronomers rebuilt their instruments. Philosophers rewrote lost commentaries. Doctors compared ancient texts and rediscovered forgotten cures. And though Baghdad's scrolls had vanished in flame and flood, the wisdom they carried began to reappear, not on paper, but in the minds of men and women who refused to forget. History moves like water. It flows, it bends, it vanishes for a moment, and then reappears where no one expects it. Baghdad had burned, but the Golden Age was not gone. It was waiting to be reborn somewhere new, under a different sky. When Hulagu Khan returned from the smoking ruins of Baghdad, his triumph was shadowed by silence. The victory was total, and yet something felt hollow. The Mongols had brought the greatest city in the world to its knees. But the wealth they plundered could not replace the wisdom they had destroyed. Years passed, and among the Mongols themselves, a strange change began. The fire that had consumed Baghdad began to dim, replaced by curiosity. Some Mongol princes grew fascinated by the very world they had conquered. They began to learn the languages of the scholars they once enslaved. They studied the stars, the medicines, the scriptures of Islam. It was as if the spirit of Baghdad whispered even to its destroyers. By the late 13th century, a remarkable transformation occurred. Hulagu's descendants, the Ilkhanid dynasty, slowly turned toward Islam. Under Ghazan Khan, 1295 to 1304, the Mongols of Persia officially embraced the faith of the very people they had conquered. The Quran, once trampled beneath hooves, was now recited in their courts. Mosques were built where Mongol tents once stood. And the Ilkhanid rulers began to support scholars, architects, and poets, as if trying to rebuild piece by piece the knowledge they had burned. From ashes, wrote one chronicler, rose a garden watered by remorse. In Tabriz and Moraga, the Mongol rulers built observatories, vast circular temples of science inspired by the lost house of wisdom. Under the patronage of Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, the Moraga Observatory became one of the greatest centers of astronomy in the medieval world. He had once been in Baghdad, a witness to its fall. Now he turned grief into purpose, mapping the stars that once guided travelers to the city's gates. The Mongols, who had once known only the horizon of the steppe, began to gaze upward, toward the infinite. There was irony in this transformation. The same empire that had drenched the Tigris in ink was now funding the writing of new books. The same writers who had shattered the domes of Baghdad were now building schools, hospitals, and libraries. It was not redemption. History rarely grants such grace. But it was remembrance, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been lost. Through the Ilkhanids, the knowledge of Baghdad seeped into Persia, and from Persia into Anatolia, and from there, through traders, monks, and travelers into Europe. The name Baghdad became more than a place. It became a memory, a symbol of what civilization could achieve, and how fragile that achievement was. Poets wrote of it as one writes of paradise lost. Philosophers spoke of it as a warning. And travelers, when they passed through its ruins, lowered their voices, as if walking through a tomb where wisdom itself was buried. Even the Mongols could not escape the pull of what they destroyed. In learning, in art, in faith, Baghdad's fire had burned its way into their souls. Centuries passed. The Tigris flowed on, dark, patient, indifferent. It carried with it the silt of empires and the ashes of books, as if preserving their memory beneath its surface. Where once scholars had debated under moonlight, now shepherds walked quietly among broken columns. The call to prayer still rose, faint, echoing through empty courtyards, reminding the living that Baghdad, though fallen, was not dead. The people rebuilt as they could. Homes were fashioned from the rubble of palaces. The marble that once paved the caliph's hall now lined humble mosques. And in the hearts of the survivors, a stubborn ember of pride refused to fade. The Mongols burned our city, one imam whispered. But they could not burn our faith. When the Ilkhanid rule waned, new powers began to rise. Persians, Turks, Arabs, each sought to claim the wounded jewel of Mesopotamia. But none could restore the brilliance that had once lit the world. By the 15th century, Baghdad fell under the Jalarids, then the Black Sheep Turkmen, and later the White Sheep Turkmen. Each dynasty left a trace. A repaired dome here, a rebuilt mosque there. But the city remained fragile, its glory a fading echo. Then, in 1534, the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent entered Baghdad. He came not as a destroyer, but as a ruler who wished to renew. For the first time in 300 years, the city was treated not as a conquest, but as a crown. Under the Ottomans, Baghdad began to breathe again. New walls rose along the river. Markets filled with silk and spices. Pilgrims journeyed safely once more from Damascus to the shrines of Iraq. The Ottomans repaired the shrines of Imam Musa al-Qadim and Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, making Baghdad again a place of reverence and learning. Though it never regained its medieval brilliance, it became a city of peace, in name and in spirit. Suleiman's architects built new bridges across the Tigris, and his scholars reintroduced old texts copied from Cairo and Istanbul. The House of Wisdom was gone, but its spirit, its hunger for knowledge, had spread so far, that rebuilding it no longer meant one place, but a world full of students. Even in Europe centuries later, Baghdad lived on in memory. Renaissance thinkers spoke of it in wonder, as if it were a fable, the city of light in the east, where the stars were first named, and where the minds of men once soared. To travelers, Baghdad was both a myth and a lesson. They came seeking the splendor of the Abbasids, and found ruins whispering of impermanence. They wrote of streets still haunted by knowledge, where children played beside fragments of fallen minarets. Here, wrote one Venetian merchant, the stones themselves seemed to remember. Baghdad had been reborn, not in power, but in memory. The Mongols had burned its body, but its soul, unbound by time, continued to wander the ages, whispering lessons to all who would listen. When Baghdad burned in 1258, it was thought that knowledge itself had died. But the truth is gentler and far more enduring. The scholars who fled carried with them not gold, but memory. Manuscripts were copied, recopied, hidden, and carried across deserts and seas. In Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba, fragments of Baghdad's knowledge took root. Arabic translations of Aristotle, Galen, and Euclid, once kept in the House of Wisdom, survived through the work of refugee scholars. These texts would later cross into Europe, translated again into Latin, feeding the spark of the Renaissance. "The ink of Baghdad," wrote one monk in Paris, "drips still upon our parchment." Through the Toledo School of Translators in Spain, centuries-old Arabic manuscripts were rendered into Latin by men who never forgot to credit their Eastern sources. From Baghdad's philosophers, Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Averroes, came the foundations of European medicine, logic, and astronomy. Even as Baghdad lay in ruins, its ideas traveled, in caravans of books, in ships crossing the Mediterranean, in whispers between scholars separated by continents but joined by thought. And so, in a quiet irony, the city destroyed by fire gave birth to the Age of Enlightenment. Long before the fall, Baghdad's astronomers had charted the heavens from observatories built under the Abbasids. Their star tables, the Zij al-Sindhind, and later al-Tusi's planetary models, inspired later European scholars, men like Copernicus, who would use those same calculations to shape a new model of the cosmos. What the Mongols burned, the stars remembered. The Baghdad that had watched the night sky continued to speak through equations, through lenses, through the quiet ticking of clocks built by men who studied its legacy. In the monasteries of Italy and France, scribes copied texts on medicine that still bore the fingerprints of Ibn Sina. Avicenna. In universities like Bologna and Oxford, students studied his Canon of Medicine, a book born in the East, nurtured by Baghdad's scholars, and cherished in the West for over 600 years. Philosophers like Thomas Aquinas wrestled with the thoughts of Averroes, who had drawn upon Baghdad's Greek and Arabic archives. The chain of thought was unbroken, a golden thread stretching from the Tigris to the Thames. Baghdad's wisdom had not perished. It had simply changed its home. Few in Europe ever spoke the name Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, but its ghost walked beside them. Every experiment, every chart, every medical cure bore a whisper of its method. The Mongols had destroyed a city, but they could not destroy the method of thought it had given the world. The patient search for truth. The belief that faith and reason could walk side by side. Baghdad lived on not through power, but through knowledge. In the hearts of those who sought to understand the world, its flame still flickered, steady, quiet, and eternal. As the centuries turned, the wounds of Baghdad began to scar over. The Mongol fires were no longer seen, only felt, a memory embedded in the stones. The city had survived invasions, plagues, floods, and yet it breathed. Under the Ottoman Empire, Baghdad settled into a new rhythm, slower, quieter, but dignified. Its scholars copied manuscripts by hand. Its poets recited verses by the Tigris. Its merchants once again filled the bazaars with the scent of spice and parchment. Though the caliphate was gone, the spirit of knowledge that once defined the Abbasids lived in small gestures. A teacher's lesson, a poet's sigh, a calligrapher's careful curve of ink. Baghdad, wrote an Ottoman traveler in the 17th century, is no longer a throne of kings, but it remains a throne of memory. The shrines of Imam Musa al-Qadim, Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, and Zubaydah became the new heart of Baghdad's faith. Pilgrims came from far across the Muslim world, turning the city once again into a crossroads, not of empires but of souls. The Ottomans built madrasas, mosques, and caravanserais. In their libraries, manuscripts once thought lost were recopied again, not for kings or courts but for preservation. Each word rewritten was a quiet defiance against forgetting, and so the people learned to live among ruins, not in mourning but in reverence. Travelers of the 18th and 19th centuries wrote of Baghdad, as if entering a dream half remembered. The domes gleamed faintly in the sun. The air smelled of dust and water. The city was both ancient and alive, a whisper from the age of Harun al-Rashid, still audible beneath centuries of change. European explorers sought the ruins of the Abbasid palaces, digging through the soil where Mongol hooves once thundered. They uncovered tiles, broken astrolabes, and fragments of books, letters written in faded ink, verses still legible though time had almost erased the name of their author. Even in ruin, one wrote, Baghdad seems to wait, not for power but for remembrance. In coffee houses near the Tigris, storytellers, Hakawatis, spoke softly of Harun al-Rashid, of the poets of the Abbasid court, and of the day the Mongols came. They told it not as history but as legend. Children listened wide, imagining the black river of ink, the golden domes melting under flame, and the books that sang as they died. These tales, half truth and half myth, became Baghdad's way of healing, to turn loss into story, and story into identity. The city that once ruled the world now ruled only memory. But perhaps that is the gentler empire, the kind built not on conquest, but on the quiet endurance of culture and thought. Baghdad had fallen, yes, but in its fall, it had taught humanity what it meant to rebuild. Long after the smoke had faded, the tale of Baghdad's burning refused to die. It slipped from chronicle to poem, from parchment to whisper, from the historian's careful ink, to the poet's trembling verse. In Damascus, Cairo, Shiraz, men spoke of that night as one might speak of a wound upon the soul of Islam. The House of Wisdom became a symbol, not merely of loss, but of how fragile human brilliance can be, in the face of unchecked power. When the books fell into the Tigris, wrote a Persian scribe centuries later, the river forgot its color, for ink became its blood. This was no longer history, it had become mythology, and in that transformation, Baghdad was immortalized. From Ibn al-Athir to al-Dahabi, from Bar Hebrius to Rashid al-Din, the chroniclers wrote of that year, 1258, as if writing with tears instead of ink. They did not exaggerate, they lamented. Their words trembled with disbelief at what they had seen or heard. They wrote of bodies floating like driftwood, of the air thick with smoke and prayer, of the caliph wrapped in carpet, and the scholars silenced. But even among the horror, their pens did something extraordinary. They preserved truth. They refused to let the Mongol fire consume memory. And so, through them, Baghdad still breathed. The ink of the scholar, wrote al-Dahabi, was spilled, but it did not dry. Centuries later, artists of the East and West painted the fall. Persian miniatures showed domes collapsing beneath the Mongol tide, ink-dark skies above golden ruins. European Orientalists, struck by the tragedy, painted the fall of Baghdad as they might depict the fall of Troy. Each brushstroke mourned a civilization. Each line of poetry tried to rebuild a tower of thought, out of ash and memory. In Istanbul, a scholar painted Baghdad's skyline in gold leaf, then burned the edge of the paper to black. He titled it "The Night the Stars Fell." With time, the fall of Baghdad became more than a tale of violence. It became a warning. To scholars, it spoke of the need to protect knowledge. To rulers, of the danger of arrogance. To ordinary people, of the cost of silence. Civilizations, it reminded, are not destroyed by fire alone, but by the slow forgetting that follows it. Books burn easily, said a 19th-century historian. But ideas, they smolder for centuries. The fall of Baghdad proved this truth. Its libraries turned to ash. Yet the idea of learning, of human curiosity and wonder, continued, spreading through the scholars who fled, carrying scraps of manuscripts into new lands. And so, though the Mongols thought they had silenced Baghdad, they had, in a strange way, amplified its voice. The knowledge that escaped that night would ripple across continents, to Cairo, to Andalusia, to the Renaissance halls of Europe. Baghdad fell, but the world awoke. When Baghdad burned, the world did not go dark. The embers scattered. The surviving scholars carried fragments, pages, notes, memories, like holy relics across deserts and seas. To Damascus and Cairo they fled, to Aleppo, to Samarkand, to the cities of Persia and Anatolia. There they rebuilt their libraries from memory. One scribe from the House of Wisdom, Ibn al-Talamsani, was said to have rewritten entire treatises on mathematics and astronomy from recall alone. In every city that took them in, Baghdad lived again, if only in whispers. Knowledge, wounded, wandering, and weary, found new homes. Cairo became the first refuge of Baghdad's spirit. Its scholars welcomed the refugees, and the Al-Azhar University opened its vaults to new thought. Through the words of the survivors, Egypt's libraries filled with Baghdad's wisdom, translations of Euclid, Ptolemy, Galen, Aristotle, and new Arabic commentaries on them. The physicians of Baghdad who once walked the marble corridors of the Bimaristan Al-Adudi now treated Cairo's poor by candlelight. They spoke of anatomy, of the circulation of blood, of remedies once studied by Ibn Sina and Al-Razi. Their presence transformed Cairo into the new torchbearer of the Golden Age. Baghdad's light, wrote one Egyptian poet, did not vanish. It only crossed the Nile. While Cairo rebuilt the mind, Persia guarded the heart. In Tabriz, Maraga, and Nishapur, new observatories rose under the stars. Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, who had once lived under Mongol rule, persuaded Hulagu Khan himself to fund the Maraga Observatory, a strange irony, that the destroyer of the House of Wisdom now financed its spiritual successor. From those telescopes, astronomers traced the heavens once more, continuing Baghdad's interrupted dream. Their charts and calculations would later travel west, reaching Andalusia, and from there the Latin-speaking scholars of Toledo and Córdoba translated them into European tongues. And so, through grief and exile, Baghdad's knowledge entered Europe. In Italy, the scholars of Florence and Venice read Latin copies of works once written in Baghdad. They studied the movements of stars, described by al-Battani and Ibn al-Haytham. They learned of algebra from al-Khwarizmi, of medicine from Ibn Sina, of philosophy from al-Farabi and Averroes. These were the roots of the Renaissance, not merely in art or beauty, but in the revival of reason. Leonardo da Vinci, centuries later, would sketch machines whose principles came from translations of Muslim treatises. Galileo's telescopes followed the path first traced in the observatories of Maraga and Baghdad. And thus, though the Mongols had sought to erase, they had only redirected. Even as centuries turned and empires fell, Baghdad remained a symbol of how civilization can be both fragile and eternal. The ink of its scholars flowed into Europe's printing presses. Its architecture, the domes, the gardens, the calligraphy, inspired builders from Spain to India. And its spirit, the relentless pursuit of understanding, became part of humanity's shared heritage. "No fire can burn knowledge," wrote a 17th-century historian, "when it has been breathed into the hearts of men." Baghdad had fallen, but its dream continued. In every observatory, in every library, in every curious mind that dared to ask why. And so, what the Mongols destroyed in days, the world rebuilt over centuries. Baghdad became not a ruin, but a memory that taught the world to think again. After the fall of Baghdad in 1258, silence reigned. The Tigris flowed again, clear and calm, as if it wished to forget what it had witnessed. But memory, like ink, has a way of clinging to the world. For decades, travelers who passed through the ruins spoke of shattered mosques and half-buried marble. They said the minarets leaned like broken reeds, and that at night when the moon was bright, you could hear the wind humming through the hollow bones of the city. The Mongols had left, but Baghdad had not died. Under the Ilkhanate, a generation later, life began to return. Merchants reopened their shops. Children's laughter crept into the alleys. The call to prayer echoed again from the rebuilt domes of Kark and Rizafa. Yet the grandeur of the old House of Wisdom, that light of the Islamic Golden Age, remained a ghost. Centuries passed, and with them countless legends. Some said that not all the books of the House of Wisdom were lost, that in the chaos a few brave scholars carried manuscripts across the desert, hiding them in the mountains of Persia, or burying them beneath old mosques. Others whispered that the Mongol general Hulagu, awed by what he had destroyed, ordered some of the texts preserved for his personal library. When his palace fell, those scrolls vanished again, perhaps traded, perhaps stolen, perhaps still waiting beneath the dust of history. Modern archaeologists, centuries later, have searched the banks of the Tigris for any sign of those manuscripts. They found fragments, pages of ink turned brown and brittle, mathematical notes written in perfect Kufic script, proof that Baghdad's scholars had indeed reached farther into science than Europe knew. Each fragment was a heartbeat from the past, each line a whisper of the minds that once changed the world. When the Ottoman Empire rose, Baghdad found itself under new rule. The city, still bearing scars of the Mongol sack, slowly became a prized jewel once again. Sultans restored its mosques, rebuilt its caravanserais, and commissioned scholars to revive the study of medicine, astronomy, and architecture. But the Ottoman Baghdad was not the old one. It was quieter, more introspective. The scholars spoke of the past more than the future. Their writings were filled with mourning and memory, as though they were forever speaking to the ghosts of their ancestors. Still the city endured. It remained a crossroads of trade, where Persian silk met Indian spice, and where every traveler carried away a piece of its story. Even now local storytellers say that when the river is low, you can see glimmers beneath its surface, shapes like rolled scrolls, like old shelves covered in silt. They say the Tigris keeps secrets. Historians doubt such tales. But there's something poetic in the idea that Baghdad's knowledge never truly died, only went deep, resting under the waters that once ran black with ink. Perhaps the Tigris remembers, wrote one 19th century traveler, and guards what men were not meant to lose. By the late 1800s, Baghdad had become a city both ancient and alive. Its bazaars were noisy with merchants, its air filled with the scent of cardamom and old paper. And still, in every corner, every archway, the spirit of the Golden Age lingered. The people had rebuilt, brick by brick, story by story. They did not have the libraries anymore, but they had something stronger, a memory of what knowledge once was, and a desire to regain it. In their schools they taught the names of those old scholars, Al-Kindi, Al-Razi, Ibn Sina, Al-Khwarizmi, and the children, bright and curious, listened as though they were hearing the tales of saints and heroes. Even in ruin, Baghdad refused to forget itself. Its soul, forged in knowledge and ink, outlasted the flames. As the 20th century dawned, Baghdad revealed itself anew. Excavations along the banks of the Tigris uncovered fragments of the Abbasid era, long buried beneath centuries of soil and memory. Archaeologists unearthed tiles, manuscripts, coins, and tools, each piece whispering stories of a city that had once led the world in science, art, and culture. Even small fragments of inked parchment carried the weight of centuries. Mathematical formulas, astronomical observations, medical notes. Historians across Europe and the Middle East marveled. Baghdad's past was not merely legend. It was tangible, waiting patiently beneath the dust. The city may have been destroyed, wrote one modern scholar, but knowledge is resilient. It sleeps and waits to be found again. Universities and museums in Iraq took up the mantle of preserving what remained. Manuscripts rescued from private collections were carefully copied, catalogued, and displayed. Historians studied Al-Khwarizmi's algebraic notes, Ibn Sina's medical writings, and the observations of Baghdad's astronomers. The rediscovery rekindled pride among Baghdad's residents. Schools taught the city's history with renewed passion, reminding children that they lived atop centuries of learning and resilience. Even in modern chaos, Baghdad's memory persisted. It had survived Mongol fire, political upheavals, and centuries of foreign occupation. Its spirit, forged in knowledge and curiosity, remained unbroken. Baghdad of the 20th century was different. Its skyline altered, its streets modernized. Yet every corner held traces of history. Markets buzzed with life. Mosques gleamed under the sun. And scholars quietly continued the tradition of inquiry. Even as some ruins remained, they served as a reminder that destruction cannot erase the mind of a city. Travelers who walked the old streets felt the echoes of the House of Wisdom. They imagined scholars discussing mathematics, philosophy, and medicine amid the grandeur that once was. And they understood Baghdad's true legacy was not in walls or domes, but in the ideas that had flowed from it, into the Middle East, into Europe, into the modern world. The story of Baghdad is not only one of loss, it is a story of endurance, of the resilience of human thought. Even after the Mongols burned the city, its knowledge traveled, persisted, and inspired generations. Every rediscovered manuscript, every fragment of a tile, is a reminder that human civilization can endure even through fire and ruin. The fire may consume buildings, whispered a historian, but it cannot consume curiosity. Baghdad lives in every mind that seeks to know. Baghdad, though scarred, had returned, not as the same city, but as a memory, a lesson, and a symbol of the eternal pursuit of knowledge. Close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the whispers of history settle around you. Baghdad, the city of light, of knowledge, of endless curiosity, was once engulfed in fire. The Mongols thought they had destroyed not just a city, but an entire civilization's heart. Yet even in its darkest night, Baghdad survived. Not in marble palaces, not in golden domes, but in the minds of scholars, in the hearts of storytellers, and in the eternal flow of the Tigris. Every book copied, every idea carried across continents, every observation made in distant lands, was Baghdad speaking again. Its wisdom traveled across deserts, oceans, and centuries, lighting the way for generations who had never seen its streets, but felt its influence in their science, philosophy, and art. Imagine the city at night centuries later, the streets quiet, the Tigris reflecting the moon. A single lantern glows in a scholar's window. Ink scratches across parchment. A child listens to a story of long ago, of caliphs, scholars, and lost libraries. The fire is gone. The rubble has faded. All that remains is memory, gentle, persistent, alive. Baghdad teaches us that no matter how fierce the destruction, knowledge and culture endure. Ideas are the true immortality of a city. Take another slow breath. Feel the calm like a soft breeze over the Tigris. Imagine the echoes of Baghdad's past mingling with the present, guiding us to remember, to learn, and to preserve what is precious. Let the story of Baghdad settle in your mind. Its lessons linger softly, that even in ruin, hope can remain, that knowledge cannot be fully extinguished, and that the human spirit, when fueled by curiosity, can survive every fire. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and carry with you the quiet strength of a city that never truly fell.